How long have you been with us, Evelyn? 31 years, I replied, keeping my voice steady. Harold Denton leaned back in his ergonomic chair, the skyline of Denver casting long shadows across his glass-walled office. His tone was casually cold, almost rehearsed. Impressive. That kind of loyalty is rare these days. To be exact, 31 years and 2 days, I added, eyes briefly drifting to the manila folder sitting ominously on his desk. My stomach clenched. In all my decades at Stratosphere Tech, I had never once been called into the executive suite on a Thursday afternoon. Something wasn't right. I'm Evelyn Clark, 64 years old, and until 10 minutes ago, I was the senior risk and compliance manager for one of Colorado's largest technology firms. I've spent over 3 decades ensuring Stratosphere stayed within ethical and legal bounds. I documented risks others wanted to ignore, stood up when it would have been easier to sit down, and kept the company's name clean when others tried to tarnish it for convenience. My full pension was set to vest on Monday. Just 4 days away. The moment I had worked my entire adult life for was nearly in my grasp. Harold pushed the folder toward me. Due to organizational restructuring and budgetary constraints, today will be your last day. His fingers tapped the file once. Your severance package is included. Please review and return it signed by tomorrow. Otherwise, it's void. He still hadn't looked me in the eye. The air in the office felt heavy. Budgetary constraints? Stratosphere had posted its highest annual profits just last month. This is effective immediately, he added, already glancing at his smartwatch. Oddly, I didn't feel angry. Or shocked. I felt clear. This wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy, carefully timed, coldly executed. They wanted me gone before my pension vested. By Monday, I would have cost them more than they were willing to pay. Thank you for the opportunity, I said quietly, tucking the folder under my arm. Harold looked momentarily confused, as if he'd expected me to cry or argue. But I'd spent a lifetime spotting patterns, and this one was unmistakable. I stood, adjusted my blazer, and walked out with my dignity untouched. Amanda from HR stood awkwardly as I boxed up my things. A photo of my late husband Marcus, a dusty succulent my son gave me before his deployment. A plaque for 30 years of service. I didn't take much. The things that mattered most wouldn't fit in a box anyway. I'm sorry, Evelyn, Amanda whispered. Her eyes flicked toward the security guard, standing nearby. This isn't fair. No, it isn't, I replied, calm as ever. What they didn't know, or maybe hoped I'd forget, was that for the past 5 years, I had been collecting evidence. Emails, financial reports, discrepancies in audit trails. Harold's fingerprints were all over decisions that risked regulatory breaches. Every ignored memo. Every buried warning. I had it all. The guard held the door open. Take care, Mrs. Clark. I stepped out into the crisp Denver air, rain soft against my coat. My time at Stratosphere was over. But I wasn't done. Not even close. The pension I had counted on all these years was gone, at least for now. When I pulled into the driveway of my modest brick home in South Denver, I sat in the car for a long moment, letting the full weight of the day settle over me like the gray April sky overhead. Harold Denton had only been at Stratosphere Tech for 6 months. He'd arrived with buzzwords like efficiency and streamlining operations, which, in corporate speak, always translated to cutting heads to make numbers look prettier. I knew our paths would eventually collide. That moment came 2 weeks ago when I refused to approve compliance on his newest cost-cutting initiative, one that blatantly danced around multiple federal safety and reporting regulations. I expected tension. I didn't expect a surgical strike against my entire career. Inside, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat at the kitchen table, the scent of lemon and steam rising as I opened the manila folder. The severance terms were as insulting as they were predictable. 3 months' pay in exchange for waiving all rights to future claims against the company. No pension. No healthcare continuation. No mention of my 31 years of service. Just a check and a cleverly worded trap designed to buy my silence. They thought I'd panic, that I'd sign out of fear. But I wasn't scared. I was furious. I set the papers aside and walked into my home office, a cozy space filled with books, framed photos, and my small but solid desk. Behind a row of photo albums on the lower shelf sat a fireproof lockbox. For the last 4 years, I'd quietly been collecting documents, saving emails, and keeping notes. Not because I wanted revenge, but because something deep inside told me that one day I might need to protect myself. I opened the box. Inside were hundreds of pages, loan applications with obviously falsified data, internal reports with doctored numbers, and emails with direct instructions to manipulate quality control dates. Each one carefully dated, cross-referenced, and cataloged. Everything pointed to a widening pattern of fraud that had only gotten worse under Harold's leadership. Every concern I'd raised through proper channels had been ignored. Every warning I'd issued had been brushed aside. Now I understood why. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name, Gregory Santos. Gregory had once been Stratosphere's CFO. These days, he worked for the Securities and Exchange Commission. We hadn't spoken in years, but he had always appreciated my precision, even when others thought I was too meticulous. It was time. The next morning, I rose with purpose. After a 2-hour conversation with Gregory the night before, I had direction. I pulled on my navy suit, the one I saved for big meetings, and began the meticulous task of preparing my files. Gregory had been blunt. This isn't just about wrongful termination, Evelyn. What you're describing suggests possible securities fraud. The pension timing? That's just the surface. He told me not to sign anything, and to secure everything. By Saturday afternoon, I had 3 complete packages, one for the SEC, one for my records, and one to keep, just in case. My phone buzzed repeatedly. Amanda from HR, Harold Denton, even someone from legal. I didn't answer. They were too late. I let every call go to voicemail, listening to their messages grow increasingly desperate. Evelyn, we really need that paperwork signed today. Harold's voice crackled with forced calm. I can swing by and pick it up if that helps. The company's legal counsel didn't bother with politeness. Ms. Clark, it is imperative we receive your signed agreement before close of business. Failure to comply may result in forfeiture of your severance entirely. Their panic confirmed everything I suspected. They were exposed. And they knew it. That agreement wasn't just a formality. It was their firewall. They needed me quiet. By the weekend. At 4:30 p.m., my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Harold standing stiffly on my porch, looking thoroughly out of place in his tailored charcoal suit amid my unpretentious neighborhood in South Denver. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing around as if he didn't want to be seen here. Evelyn, I know you're in there, he called. This is ridiculous. Just sign the papers, and we can all move on. I didn't answer. I stood just beyond the door, arms crossed, heart steady. Eventually, he placed a large envelope in my mailbox and walked briskly back to his luxury sedan. Only once his taillights disappeared down the block did I retrieve it. Inside was another copy of the severance agreement, along with a handwritten note. Final opportunity. Signed by 9 a.m. Monday. That evening, my daughter Elizabeth called for our usual Saturday check-in. Her voice was warm, but sharp with intuition. Mom? You sound different. What's going on? I paused, then exhaled. I was terminated yesterday. What? But you're days away from your pension vesting. That can't be legal. They did it, I said quietly. But don't worry. I'm taking care of it. Do you want me to come home? I can catch a flight first thing. No, sweetheart. Stay where you are. I've got this. After we hung up, I sat in my living room as the spring dusk settled outside, thinking about the meeting on Monday. I had spent years raising red flags within the company, hoping someone would listen. I'd been patient, loyal, professional. But Stratosphere Tech made its choice. And now I was making mine. I wasn't going to sign. I wasn't going to be silenced. And I certainly wasn't going to let them erase 3 decades of my life without a fight. Monday couldn't come fast enough. When it finally arrived, I woke with a focus I hadn't felt in years. I dressed with precision, slipped my compiled documents into a locked briefcase, and drove downtown to the federal building. The SEC offices were quiet and clean, glass-walled and professional. Gregory met me in the lobby, his face a little older, but still marked with the same sharp intellect I'd trusted years ago. "Evelyn," he said, shaking my hand warmly. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." "It's good to see you, Gregory. And thank you for taking this seriously." He led me into a conference room where 2 others waited, Angela Brennan, a senior enforcement attorney, and James Weston, a forensic accountant. They greeted me with polite nods. "Miss Clark," Angela began, "once we begin, there's no turning back. Are you certain you want to proceed?" I met her gaze. "I am." For the next 3 hours, I walked them through everything: falsified reports, manipulated audits, and backdated certifications. The truth, finally, had a voice. The pattern of revenue manipulation became increasingly blatant in recent quarters, especially after Harold Denton's arrival. James, the forensic accountant, flipped through page after page of documentation, his brows drawn in tight concentration. "These discrepancies aren't minor," he finally said. "The company has been inflating revenue by at least 18% over the last 2 years. That's not creative accounting, it's securities fraud." Angela turned to me. "And you reported these issues internally?" "Multiple times," I said, sliding over a stack of printed emails and memos. Each time I was told the concerns were being reviewed or that I was misreading the data. But once Harold came on board 6 months ago, all of my reports were redirected to his office. After that, they disappeared. Gregory leaned forward, his hands folded. "And you believe your termination was directly linked to these reports?" "Without question," I said. "The timing alone, 3 days before my pension vested, makes that obvious. But more than that, I just flagged several new violations tied to his latest cost-cutting program. He couldn't risk me escalating any further." As our meeting wrapped, Angela outlined the path ahead. "We'll need your formal statement, and then we'll begin the investigation. Typically, these are confidential until we move forward with enforcement action." "How long does that process usually take?" I asked. "It varies," she replied. "But with the evidence you've provided and the consistency of the misconduct, we may move quickly on this one." I hadn't even pulled into my driveway when my phone buzzed. It was Amanda from HR. Her voice was shaky. "Evelyn, something's going on. The board just called an emergency meeting. Harold's been locked in his office since this morning, and there are rumors that SEC investigators contacted legal." So, it had begun. I nodded to myself, calm. "I'm not surprised." Amanda hesitated. "Evelyn, did you report something?" "I did what I should have done a long time ago," I said. "Has there been any movement on my pension paperwork?" "That's actually why I'm calling. The executive committee is reviewing your termination. They've frozen everything until further notice." An hour later, the phone rang again. This time it was William Hargrove, the chairman of the board. I could count the number of words he'd said to me over the last decade on one hand. Now he sounded unusually formal and strangely unsure. "Miss Clark," he began, voice tight, "we seem to have a situation that would benefit from your input. Would you be open to a meeting tomorrow morning?" "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Mr. Hargrove," I said, without a hint of apology. "Any discussion will need to include my legal counsel and potentially SEC representatives. I'm sure you understand." The silence that followed was thick. "I see," he finally said. "Perhaps we can arrange something more formal." When I hung up, I didn't feel victorious. Only tired. I never wanted to be a whistleblower. I only wanted to do my job honestly and retire with the security I'd earned. But Stratosphere Tech made that impossible. And now, the consequences had arrived. That night, the calls poured in: former colleagues, executives scrambling to contain the fallout. I answered none of them. By Wednesday morning, it was front-page news. Local business journals ran bold headlines: SEC opens investigation into Stratosphere Tech. The company's stock began to plummet, while analysts who once praised Herald's aggressive efficiency suddenly changed their tune. Analysts who praised Stratosphere Tech just weeks ago were now openly questioning the integrity of the company's entire reporting structure. 2 days later, I received a formal letter from Stratosphere's legal department. It withdrew my termination and placed me on administrative leave with full benefits, pending an internal review. A transparent move to limit further damage, far too late to undo the harm they'd already caused. At 10 a.m. sharp, I arrived at Stratosphere's downtown headquarters. My attorney, Barbara Reynolds, no relation, though the coincidence never failed to amuse us, walked beside me. The same security guard who had escorted me out just days ago now nodded respectfully as we entered. His eyes briefly met mine, and there was something like regret in them. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy. Employees clustered in corners, whispering. Conversations hushed when we walked by. The silence said everything. We were led to the executive boardroom where William Hargrove, the chairman, waited. With him were the company's outside counsel and 3 board members. Harold Denton was notably absent. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Clark," William began, his tone measured but strained. The man looked like he hadn't slept in days. "We've launched a full internal investigation based on the concerns you've brought to light." Barbara stepped in before I could speak. "Let's clarify something up front, Mr. Hargrove." Ms. Clark did not suddenly raise these concerns. She documented and reported these issues consistently for over 4 years, as was her responsibility. The company ignored her warnings and then terminated her 3 days before her pension vested. That timeline speaks volumes. William shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Yes, well, we're looking closely into that. I want to personally assure Ms. Clark that her termination has been fully rescinded. She is, as of now, considered an employee in good standing with all benefits restored." I looked at him directly. "Including my pension?" "Of course," he replied quickly. "In fact, we'd like to offer you a consulting position, effective immediately, should you choose. We value your institutional knowledge and expertise." "My client won't be making any decisions today," Barbara interjected smoothly. "And no future discussions will proceed until we've received a full accounting of how her prior concerns were handled, or rather mishandled." For over an hour, we sat in that boardroom while they tried to distance themselves from Harold and the financial misconduct. They presented themselves as victims misled, unaware, shocked. It was a performance, and I'd seen better from interns on their first day. I let Barbara take the lead, quietly watching the faces of people I'd known for decades. These were the same people who once looked through me in elevators. Now, they couldn't look away. As we gathered our things, William made one final appeal. "Ms. Clark," he said, almost pleading, "we're hoping you might be willing to speak with the SEC about the corrective actions we're taking. Your support would be invaluable." I looked him square in the eye for the first time. "Mr. Hargrove, I spent 31 years upholding this company's compliance. I filed 47 formal reports about irregularities. I sent 16 memos. Requested 9 meetings with leadership. 2 were granted. Nothing changed. Tell me, at what point in that history did I have your support?" The room fell into a dense, uneasy silence. "I'll cooperate fully," I continued, "with the SEC, with your internal review. But I'll speak only to the facts, as I always have. Whether those facts helped or harmed Stratosphere Tech, that was on them. It's what you do next, not what you say in that room, that matters," Barbara said quietly as we stepped into the hallway. She gave me a small, proud smile as we exited the building. That was perfectly stated. It wasn't until we reached the parking lot that I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. The adrenaline that had carried me through that tense boardroom exchange was fading fast, leaving my limbs heavy but my mind sharp. This wasn't a victory. Not yet. It was only the start of long overdue accountability. What happens now? I asked, leaning against my car, watching the late morning sun warm the skyline of downtown Denver. Now, Barbara said, unlocking her door with a calm nod. Now they scramble. The investigation continues, the legal team starts damage control, and the board tries to salvage what's left of their reputations. She paused, looking at me. But make no mistake, Evelyn, they're terrified of you. I shook my head. They're not afraid of me. They're afraid of the truth. There is a difference, she agreed. And that difference is exactly why you're going to win. No matter how this plays out. On the drive home, I found myself thinking of Marcus, my late husband. He'd always admired my focus, even when others saw it as obsessive. Your attention to detail isn't a quirk, Evelyn, he used to say with that half-smile of his. It's a superpower. Maybe he was right. By Friday, just 1 week after my so-called termination, the story had exploded into a full-scale corporate scandal. The SEC issued formal information requests to Stratosphere Tech. William Hargrove circulated an internal memo announcing Harold Denton's suspension, pending the results of the investigation. The company's stock plummeted nearly 30% in just 5 days, rattling major investors and longtime partners. I was no longer just Evelyn Clark, the quiet compliance manager. The headlines now referred to me as the whistleblower who brought down Stratosphere. It was surreal, unsettling even. I didn't want attention. I just wanted truth. While the media swirled, I remained focused, working daily with SEC investigators in a temporary office space just 2 blocks from Stratosphere's headquarters. The documents I'd provided had unlocked critical leads, but the deeper they dug, the worse the picture became. Gregory called one afternoon, his voice tense. Evelyn, it's worse than we thought. I braced myself. How far back does it go? 5 years minimum. Before Denton. He just accelerated it. But there's evidence this manipulation started long before his arrival. I nodded slowly. There were gaps I couldn't fill. Missing reports, inaccessible executive documents. Well, we have them now, he continued. And they tell a very deliberate story. This wasn't oversight, it was systematic fraud. At least 3 board members signed off on transactions they knew were inflated. The news should have felt vindicating. But instead, it made my stomach churn. This wasn't just negligence. It was betrayal. The company I had devoted 31 years to had rotted from within, and the people I had trusted had played a role in the very wrongdoing I had spent years trying to expose. Later that afternoon, Elizabeth called. Her voice was tight with anger. Mom, have you seen the news? Denton's out there giving interviews. He's saying you had performance issues, that you were bitter about being passed over for a promotion. I closed my eyes. Not surprised. It's a standard play, I said. Attack the whistleblower. Make it personal. Well, it's infuriating, she snapped. It doesn't matter, I said gently. The evidence speaks for itself. And my performance reviews? I smiled. Impeccable. Exemplary. For 31 years, I told Elizabeth. They can't erase that now. But Harold Denton was certainly trying. By that evening, several media outlets had picked up his version of the story, questioning my motives, insinuating I had doctored documents to retaliate after being passed over. It was a desperate narrative from a man watching his empire collapse, but it still hurt. Seeing my integrity called into question in headlines was a sting I hadn't fully prepared for. Barbara called the moment the news broke. Don't respond to any of it, she warned. The SEC is issuing a formal statement tomorrow confirming your whistleblower status and validating the chain of evidence you provided. Let the official channels speak for you. I wasn't planning to respond, I told her. But I am going to do something else. The next morning, I drove to my local bank. Tracy Ferguson, the branch manager, had handled most of Stratosphere Tech's local accounts over the years and knew me well. Evelyn, she said as she greeted me. I've been following the news. How are you holding up? I'm all right, I said. But I need access to my safe deposit box. Inside a quiet, secure room, I unlocked the metal drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope I'd placed there over 3 years ago. It contained printed copies of internal emails between Harold's predecessor and two senior board members. In them, they discussed ways to manipulate quarterly results ahead of a major acquisition deal, emails I'd stumbled across while archiving old communications. Back then, I didn't know what to make of them. They weren't tied to any of my active compliance reports, so I'd kept them separate, trusting my instincts that they might matter someday. That day had come. I called Gregory. "I have something else you need to see," I told him. "It shifts the entire narrative." I drove straight to his temporary SEC office, not with the hope of vindication, but with certainty that the truth, all of it, was finally surfacing. By Monday morning, 10 days after my termination, the boardroom at Stratosphere was in full crisis mode. Though I wasn't invited to the emergency session, I didn't need to be there to know what was happening. Gregory called me from just outside the meeting. "It's chaos," he reported. The SEC enforcement team just walked them through the preliminary findings. 3 board members resigned on the spot. Harold's trying to claim he was just following existing practices, but no one's buying it anymore. By noon, Stratosphere Tech issued a formal press release: leadership restructuring, full cooperation with federal authorities. The carefully crafted language confirmed the resignation of 4 board members, including William Hargrove, and Harold Denton's termination for cause. Their stock, already battered, took another 12% dive that afternoon. My phone rang again. It was Amanda from HR. "The interim CEO would like to meet with you tomorrow, if you're willing." That CEO was Patricia Donovan, the company's former COO. She had always treated me with professional courtesy, even if she'd kept her distance from compliance issues. I agreed to the meeting on the condition that it happen at my attorney's office. When Patricia arrived the next morning, she looked worn down but focused. "Evelyn," she began without fanfare, "I won't waste time with small talk. The company is in crisis. And you're at the center of it. Not because you did something wrong, but because you were the only one who consistently did what was right." She slid the folder across the table, eerily similar to the one Harold Denton had handed me just 11 days earlier. "This document officially rescinds your termination," Patricia explained. "Your employment is reinstated retroactively, and your full pension is confirmed as vested. It also includes a compensation package, recognizing the difficulties you've endured." I opened it carefully. Inside was a detailed agreement offering a lump sum equal to 5 years of my salary, full healthcare coverage for life, and a formal written apology from the board of directors. "We're also establishing a new corporate ethics division," she added. "We'd like you to help design it as a consultant post-retirement. Your experience is invaluable." I closed the folder without offering a comment. My eyes lifted to hers. "And Harold Denton? The board members involved?" Her expression tightened. "Criminal charges are pending. The company will not be defending them." Justice, real justice, had finally arrived at Stratosphere Tech. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom in downtown Denver, watching as Harold and 2 former board members entered guilty pleas to securities fraud. The man who once dismissed me like an outdated file now stood before a judge, diminished in stature, his once confident posture replaced by quiet resignation. Our eyes met as he turned to leave. And in that glance, I saw a flicker of recognition, not of me personally, but of what I represented. Consequences. The Stratosphere scandal had grown into a national case study, an example of corporate accountability failures and the vital, too often overlooked role of internal compliance officers. Universities dissected the case in business ethics classes. Regulatory panels used it as fuel to strengthen protections for future whistleblowers. I had declined the consulting position they offered. Instead, I began working directly with federal regulators to develop better whistleblower protocols, ones that protected not just jobs, but the dignity of those who stepped forward. My story inspired others. Compliance professionals across industries began submitting their own documentation of misconduct. It became a ripple effect. One quiet voice had helped spark a movement. The SEC awarded me a substantial whistleblower payment, 15% of the penalties levied against Stratosphere. Between that, my fully vested pension, and the settlement, I found myself with more financial security than I ever imagined. With part of the funds, I started the Marcus Clark Scholarship, named after my late husband, for women pursuing careers in corporate ethics and compliance. It felt like a way to honor the man who always believed in my superpower. Elizabeth moved back to Denver shortly after, bringing my 2 grandchildren with her. We spent weekends together at my new lakeside home near Evergreen, building memories I'd missed while chasing deadlines and drafting compliance reports. One evening, while we watched the sunset turn the water to gold, Elizabeth turned to me. "Mom, do you regret staying at Stratosphere all those years, knowing how it ended?" I thought carefully. "No," I said softly. "I regret that exposing them became necessary. But I don't regret the work I did there. Integrity isn't about doing the right thing when it's easy. It's about holding your ground, especially when it costs you." Elizabeth smiled, nodding. "You taught me that. Not with lectures, but with your life." And that, I realized, was the greatest reward. Not the vindication. Not the money. But knowing I'd passed down the value of standing firm, even when the world tries to shake you. As for Stratosphere Tech, they survived, smaller and sobered. They still send me their annual reports. Maybe as a gesture of closure. Maybe as an apology. I read them carefully, not with bitterness, but with the satisfaction of someone who once lit the fuse. Some might call my story revenge, but I know better. I've never viewed it as anything extraordinary. I simply did what I've always done, documented the facts, reported the truth, and stood firmly by my findings. For over 3 decades, that was the rhythm of my work. Quiet diligence. Steady integrity. No fanfare, no shortcuts. The only difference this time was that, finally, people were forced to listen. It shouldn't have taken a scandal to validate what I'd been saying for years. But sometimes, change only comes when silence is broken loudly enough. And when that moment arrived, I was ready not because I sought attention or revenge, but because I had prepared for it in every line I'd written, every document I'd saved, every memo I refused to retract. I hadn't changed. The world around me had simply run out of places to hide the truth. And truth, when documented well, always finds its voice. If my story moved you, if something in these pages made you pause, nod, or think about your own workplace, your own values, I ask you not to stay silent. Leave a comment. Tell me what part resonated with you. Share your own story, or simply stand with me in believing that truth still matters. For 31 years, I did my job with integrity, even when no one was watching. But in the end, what mattered most was who was willing to listen. Be that person. Be the one who listens. Support those who speak up, even when their voices tremble. And if you're that voice, don't let fear silence you. You're not alone. To every reader out there walking the tightrope of ethics and employment, here's my advice. Document everything. Trust your instincts. When something doesn't feel right, it usually isn't. Speak up, even if your voice shakes, and remember that your silence won't protect you, but your courage might protect others. You don't have to be loud. You just have to be clear and patient. Because justice doesn't always come quickly, but it does come, especially when it's carried by facts and fortified by principle. You don't need to be a hero. You just need to stand firm. I'm no different than many of you reading this now. I didn't set out to be a whistleblower. I just wanted to do the right thing and retire with dignity. But when the moment came to choose between silence and truth, I chose the truth. And I would do it again. If you've ever wondered whether one person can make a difference, know that you can. I'm living proof. So take this story, carry it with you, and when your moment comes, choose to stand. I'll be standing with you.